I have the great honor of introducing Ralph Chan this morning in his program that he's going to talk about. Ralph is a doctoral candidate in sociology at the University of Vienna. He's also a program officer in the Erasmus Plus Youth program of the European Union. In addition to that, Ralph, among his many other talents, is the bureau editor in Austria of the European Filipino magazine Roots and Wings. In his research, he emphasizes qualitative research methods and studies of youth, particularly emphasizing interviews of youth and adults. So Ralph, I'm going to introduce you now and welcome you to the group, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you very much for the introduction, Yvonne, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are currently watching this webinar. I would like to share with you my screen and the PowerPoint. Today, I would like to talk not about my PhD project actually, but rather on the issue or understanding that the Filipino community is not just a big community in America, but around the world. So like in Europe, particularly, we are a bigger group in German-speaking countries. And today I would like to show you a little bit about what the young Filipinos in Europe are actually doing. In this sense, I would like to also show you this on the example of the book that we published, which has the name Common Diversities, Junge Filipinos in deutschsprachigen Raum, or translated Common Diversities, Young Filipinos in German-speaking countries. Oh, sorry, it's not yet in the presentation mode. So I would like to guide you a little bit in this presentation through the context of global Philippine X. So we try to not just talk about Filipinos or Filipinas, so not just in two gender forms, but trying to understand the Filipinos and with different genders. Then I will go to the context of Filipinos in German-speaking countries, and then show you the examples of what we found out in our book. So let me start by saying that we have a lot of Filipinos around the world. As we can see here on this picture, there are a lot of authors talking about Filipinos, but rather on the context of America. So there is a small amount of authors and studies that actually talking about the European context. I just want to mention here that I think America has been quite good in showing also the different communities, like for example, the Filipino American community. Approximately 4.2 million Filipinos are in America, and the first Filipinos arrived in 1904. However, in the context of as the historians say it, in the Louisiana Purchase Exposition as part of the Human Zoo. So they were not first Filipinos that came to America were not unskilled laborers. The first unskilled laborers, Filipinos, were in the 1920s. So before that, already the first Filipinos arrived there, but for a Human Zoo exposition. Now, moving to the next century, we can see here there are a lot of different books, as I mentioned. Like, for example, I just want to mention two books that are for me quite important. Like, for example, The Latinos of Asia. You can see it here, Latino of Asia. How Filipino Americans Break the Rules of Race by the Filipino American sociologist Anthony Ocampo, who talks about that Filipinos are actually have quite similar character traits like Latino American or Latinos, Latin people. And another book is from Sharon Quinsett, which is currently on the market. The book is called Insurgent Communities: How Protests Create a Filipino Diaspora. This is also quite important because, as we can see here from these two examples, it is quite well known. The Filipino Americans are quite well known internationally. However, if you look in further, so beyond the American context, you won't find so many books. Let me show you some of the books that I found out, or some of the authors. So we have, for example, in Germany, or in German-speaking countries, we have in Austria, Marina Wetzelmeier, who is a Filipino-Austrian journalist who wrote about the leftists, or the Linke of the Philippines. So the left is in the Philippines, an introductory book where she describes the political landscapes of the Philippines. The Overseas Fabulous Pinay, a modern Filipina's handbook on how to thrive abroad, is from Donna Avellana Künstler, a Swiss Filipina. Also, Color of Sky, Growing Up Swiss with Chocolate Brown Skin, from Lenny K. Buigayong, who is also a Filipino Swiss, who talks about her a history and her life as Filipina in Switzerland. We also have the German Filipino book author Mo Schneider, who has written a fiction book, Torn into Pieces, and we have a very big community in United Kingdom, and one of the leading authors there is Candy Goulet, who writes about children's books and stories about Filipinos in Great Britain. Why do I want to talk about Filipinos now today? It's because I think, and you will see it in the you'll see it today in my presentation, that role models need to be seen. And in some point, I see myself also as a role model for those who cannot or who don't have a voice, cannot show what they would like to show. Also, always important in the German-speaking context. In Austria, it's about, we will see it, about 30,000 people who are now in Austria, living in Austria, or were born or moved to Austria. However, approximately 12 million Filipinos live abroad or overseas. And the biggest Filipino communities in Europe can be found in Spain, United Kingdom, Italy, and France. And this also has an economic impact. Like in 2019, overseas Filipinos sent back around $32.2 billion to the Philippines back. So as we can see, immigration itself is not just has not just something to do with identity development or with the migration history, but has also an economic impact to the countries and how the society is developing. And in the case of Austria and Germany, there are roughly 30,000 Filipinos already here that are already citizens or second and third generation. And in Switzerland, it's about 10,000 Filipinos that are living in Switzerland now. Today, I want to show you a little bit about the history of the Filipino migration in Austria. And as you can see on the second bullet point, it started in the 1970s when the city government of Vienna initiated a program to recruit Filipino nursing staff to combat the nurse shortage. So skilled laborers were back then already a problem, an issue for the government, a political issue, until today. As you can see here, there is a reference that just last year, Philippines and Austria signed a memorandum of understanding to recruit again nurses, because we have a shortage here, and Filipinos are seen as quite good laborers that can provide good work in the healthcare system. It's not just Filipinos, or let me phrase it in a different way. Filipinos also contribute to the society, not just with the local traditions, but also with their Filipino culture and identity. Meaning Filipino culture is kept alive through food, language, family, the Filipino-Austrian community and the social events. We have different events here going on every now and then. The biggest one is in summer, where the Filipino-Austrian community meets to celebrate Filipino culture, even though it's a minority in Austria. And we can see later on that food, of course, is something that communicates and beyond borders, if we want to say that. Here are just 4 of the communities in which I navigate myself in. Let me just introduce them to you, so in case you are also interested to learn a little bit more about them. So there is the Halo Halo network, which is a second, third generation network built or developed in 2020 during the pandemic, when including me, some of the Filipinos were asking themselves, why don't we have a community like the first generation here? And it's a community between Filipino-Austrians, Germans, and Swiss, where we just talk about different things and do activities to learn about our roots and about our identity. Do we consider ourselves as Filipinos, or do we consider ourselves as Austrians, as Germans, as Swiss? Do we consider ourselves as Asians or as Europeans, or what is our identity? And this is what we are actually talking about in Halo Halo. Then we have Roots and Wings that has already been introduced. It's the longest running e-magazine, online magazine of the European Filipino community. It's already in its, I think, 13th year. So look, have a look there. There's an issue coming up now where we just talk and introduce Filipino Europeans across the world. And then we have 2 other networks or associations that I also want to introduce to you, which is Center for Austrian and Philippine Culture and Language, or Centro, with the head Arlene Castañeda, who is also the co-editor of the book that I will now later introduce to you. There is language. This center gives language courses, organizes events, and tries to connect the Filipino and the Austrian community with each other through activities, through cultural activities, and through language courses. And one of the projects that is organized by Centro is, for example, this Kubo, Kulturbayanihan Österreich, or Kulturbayanihan Austria, which is a cultural and arts festival happening every year in Austria. So if you're happening to be here, you're welcome to come, and so that we can showcase you what the Filipino-Austrian community, particularly second and third generation young artists and scholars, can provide you. There are also other communities that I just want to mention. So in Switzerland, there is NOIP. There is also the association called Studio Filipino, and in Austria, there is also Rambak. So Rambak is, for example, an association that is dealing with the traditional Filipino heritage, that is working on these topics. Yes, let me now go to this a little bit maybe for English-speaking people, a little bit difficult to understand common diversities, young Filipinos in German-speaking countries. So there are similarities, there are common similarities, but also common differences. And that's why we came up with the title Common Diversities, because there are diversities that are common among young Filipinos in German-speaking countries. And I will show you now it on this book, sorry. So this is the book that I will now introduce to you. If you are more interested, you can find on the bottom left a QR code. It should work, where you can also see the content of the book. And if you're more interested also to buy that book. There are some books already in some libraries, as I know, for example, at the university in Hawaii. So just check it out if you want to have a closer look at it. So some facts about the book itself. So it is edited by Centro's head, Arlene Castañeda, and myself, and we published it in 2022. It was a quite long journey, if you want to say so. We started with planning the book in 2020 without knowing that it will have such a big effect on the community itself. Because, as you can see on the third point here, it's the first book talking about the German-speaking Filipinos. It consists of 21 chapters that are written in German and in English, including 3 introductory chapters. We had 23 authors contributed to this volume, and the book itself has around 257 pages. And we grouped the chapters into 3 themes: migration, identity, and culture. The stories that we are showcasing in these books are about, for example, Filipino women, migrant workers, political activists, the 2nd and 3rd generation, but also about, and that's why I referenced about the remittances. So the money that we transfer back again to the Philippines, also a 2nd, 3rd generation Filipinos, or even as a 2nd, 3rd generation Filipinos, to sustain a Filipino household, or to give the opportunity to have a better life in the Philippines for our families. We also talk in the first volume about identity, about the stories about self-discovery, about identity as a state of a flow. So is identity something that is fixed, or something that can be in flow? So something that can be a hybrid identity, for example. That's why there is always the question, who am I and how do I define myself? And with that said, of course, mother tongue plays an important role. That's why it's also part of the first volume. We also talk about how education is important for the Filipino community, about racism, discrimination, and Asian hate experiences, particularly in the COVID-19 pandemic, and about academics and experts. And today I will talk about it in a couple of minutes. Furthermore, there are stories about culture, about the global connectedness through media. That's one of the positive things about digital transformation, that we can connect through media to our family and friends abroad, but also looking at, of course, exploitation in this story. So how do media has also a negative impact, basically, on the Filipino community abroad? Food heritage is also an important topic. Food is not just something that we eat, but something that actually tells a lot about the community, tells a lot about Filipinos in itself, and how it is interpreted in other countries. So you won't find Filipino food, for example, here as a Filipino food, but rather as a fusion kitchen, as part of the fusion kitchen. So sometimes there are different interpretations on how food should be cooked. Of course, there are also stories about pop culture, superstition, and rituals. As mentioned before, it is the first time that someone gives the voice and shares stories about the young Filipinos in the German countries, particularly Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And that's why it has had and has an impact on the young Filipinos, because with this book, we're showing how the reality is and what these young people who either were born here, who moved here, or who just chose to live here, experience how it is to be Filipino in Austria, how their life looks like. And therefore, the question that has always somehow navigated the book and led actually to the chapters is, what are the factors that influence the identity construction, and how all these factors influence the identity construction? Meaning, I can only repeat, who am I? Where do I belong? Am I an Austrian or am I a Filipino? And now, I would like to show you, or before I would like to show you, so before I show you my book chapter, there is, or I would like to highlight again the group of the second and third generation, or show you a little bit why it is important to understand the generation nowadays. And I would like to point out five important things to remember. So the experiences of the second and third generation are as much a part of the Filipino story as those of the first generation immigrants or those living in the Philippines. Hence, these voices should not be dismissed as foreign, even though they grew up elsewhere, might be of mixed heritage. Meaning, if we talk about identity, we always should take into consideration that identity is hybrid, a result of blending of cultures. And these diverse and dynamic relationships produces narratives and multiple intersectionalities between those societies. The global Filipino young people or youth are, in this sense, a source of new ideas and discourses with regards how to understand trends in globalization and demography. And I think these 5 points are important issues to consider if we talk about the second and third generation Filipinos, but also in terms of how to handle these young people in the different communities. So my chapter has the title "In Conversation with Austrian Filipino Academics and Experts," and so the idea why I wanted to write about this topic is that, looking at studies in sociology and particularly talking about Austria, we can see that they say that education is inherited, meaning if a young person from a household with an academic background has always have an easier transition to university, and it is easier for them to get a school living certificate. People with a migration background do not have these chances or have less opportunities to get this. And there are different factors that need to be taken into account. And I will now lead you to these obstacles, if you want so. As I mentioned also in the second point here, foreign academics and experts face more obstacles than that their peers with no migration background have. Like, for example, just the knowledge about the education system, about the opportunities, about the institutional support that someone can get. These are just some of the obstacles that one might face. And this is also the question that I actually asked: why are Filipino academics and experts less prominent in Austria, or, if you want to say, invisible? The starting point, as I mentioned earlier, is my personal experiences on the one hand, but also on official statistics and scientific studies that mention this problems. And in personal experiences, for example, in university is quite heavily European, let's say in that sense. You don't find, at least in the social sciences and in sociology, people with a migration background, with a visible migration background, and with visible Asian or Filipino background. That's why I was asking myself, and since it was given to me the platform that to write a book or a book chapter about it, I wanted to kind of deepen my knowledge about this and try to understand how others read it. Therefore, I had semi-structured qualitative interviews with 5 Filipino Austrians from the second and third generation, where we talked about where we talked about their biography, about their life history that led to their decision to come to Austria or to become an expert by themselves in Austria, what the effects of social environment had in their decisions and in their biography, and certain moments in their school life, for example, or what family, friends, and school had of an impact in their decisions to become academics and experts. These 5 people, you can find here some of the characteristics of them. So we have 5 people. It's Marlon, Sandra, Gino, Mariano, and Florence, were either born in Austria or moved to Austria. And I chose them because they are in different fields. They're experts in different fields. They're academic in different fields. They're working in medicine. They are working as a teacher in IT, mathematics, and music. And all of these different factors have basically an impact in their decision in how they see themselves as Austrian Filipino academics and experts, and how they consider the obstacles or how they would interpret the obstacles. I would like to now talk more about the reasons for invisibility, or for not being so much seen in the field of academic or in universities as Filipinos. And during these interviews, there were, of course, the life stories that are where they talk about their experiences, but there are also these 4 themes that always came up in the interviews. Like, for example, because education is free, so you don't pay for schools here in Austria, young people, young Filipinos of the second, third generation here may have no or less interest for education, even though they know about the various educational paths and opportunities. Compared to that, and they're coming from the Filipino side, because if you live in the Philippines, or for example also in America, you need to pay for schools. Here in Austria, you don't need to pay any tuition fee. So like, for example, in my case, up until this my doctorate now, my PhD studies, I just pay 20 euros. Just if you reach a certain point in your studies, you need to pay a tuition fee of around 300 euros, but you don't pay for education. And because of this mindset that you don't need to pay anything, there might be the possibility that young people are not interested anymore because you can get easily a job here without having a degree. So degree is not something that opens doors for you in the labor market. Furthermore, what they said is young people don't think and want to step outside the box. Once you are in a comfortable position, you might want to just stay in your social environment. You want to stay in what you are known, or what you know. So you don't want to go ahead. You don't want to make a step ahead. So you want to just stay there where you are. And this is what they said. Young people here are more likely to stay in their own comfort zone. A third reason are the institutional barriers, as mentioned before. Like, for example, there is a language barrier, of course. Even though you were born here in Austria, in Germany, or Switzerland, there is always this language barrier of, am I actually talking real German? Do everyone understand me? Is there something why people are not accepting me or recognize? So there is always the question of, am I recognized by the majority, by the society in which I am now? Leading also to the second point here, cultural differences, the importance of education. This is connected to the first point, basically, but also to the third point of this reason, which is lack of knowledge of education system and institutional support, which I would like also to connect to the fourth point, actually, that there are less or no personal social networks outside of the community. So a lot of the first generation, so the parents of the second, third generation kids, young people, are mostly in their own communities. And those, if you are not outside of the community, you don't know about the opportunities that you might have. So institutional support, what does the government provide for you to get a degree? There are financial support, there, etc., etc. What are the paths that you can go through in the educational system? There is not just one, two, but several different options. This is not, you don't know about it if you don't step outside the box. And finally, of course, the obstacles. There are also bureaucratic obstacles like the so-called nostrification or the recognition of foreign documents or foreign degrees. So before you can start working, for example, in the healthcare system here, you need to you need to pass a German test, you need to pass several bureaucratic hurdles in order to work as a nurse here. Even though you have a bachelor degree, you are a degree holder in the Philippines. So this is something that we need taking into account why Austrian Filipino academics and experts are not so visible. So now I would like to talk about the reflection, learning, and some teaching as well from this journey, writing this book chapter. Also, of my journey as a second, third generation Filipino in Austria. So what do young people need? They need more representation. They need to see more Filipinos in those areas where you don't see them. So we need more Filipinos visible in university as an academic, as a researcher, or in other fields, in international organization, where you can become a role model in other areas of work and career paths. Also, as mentioned before, we need more personal and social networks that are outside of the Filipino community, that where we can and that the young Filipinos can see that it's okay to step outside, to not become a nurse, but a scientist, for example, not work as in gastronomy, but work in schools. And also not just develop them, but also strengthen these networks. My last question in the chapter was, what are your learnings per se when you were moving to Austria or when you were starting to become an expert or an academic. And every one of them gave me one example or one quote that I put here now. I also want to read them. So Marlon, for example, mentioned, work hard and trust yourself more. For Sandra, it is important that every young person learn that training is important, that education is basically important. Gino said, always believe in yourself. Mariano said, try to be honest to yourself to assess your strengths and weaknesses because this will be your guide to your life. And Florid said, have some interest to go outside your comfort zone or your usual environment because you will find more value in your life and in your career. So these are just some of the 5 learnings, but these are I think the most important learnings from my interview partners, but also for all of us, because we can just see that it has something to do, not just to do with visibility, but to strengthen and emphasize the importance of different factors, like, for example, training, education, uh, be confident about yourself, showing them that you can also become someone, even though you don't see it in your own environment, your own social environment, but also stepping outside your comfort zone. So what does it mean for the teaching itself? If we talk about also about human rights itself and about how we should deal with these issues. First point, encourage young people to think out of the box. Different career paths, different experiences, be the one who voice out to them that they are a valuable part of the community and they can become someone else, not just the one that they see in their own communities and networks. Build a community. Second point, build a community and network. A network and a community where you communicate with each other, not just within the community, but with, in my case, again, with the Austrian community and with the Filipino community, with the European community, with the Asian community. Or build and join networks, like, for example, the networks that I just show, where you explore more about yourself, where you explore more about your interests and be the voice of others who are invisible. Like, for example, if there is the opportunity, like today, talk about these topics, talk about the problems that young people might face and that we have in order to become visible. And finally, let's support each other. Let's support each other with our projects, with our advocacies, initiatives that we are organizing, because, and it's a food for thought, and I would like to end with it. Jose Rizal, the national hero of the Philippines, said once, "The youth is the hope of our future." And with that said, here are some references that I talked about today to the common diversities of junge Filipinos im deutschsprachigen Raum, or some other articles that I've written about the young Filipinos in the past few years. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you want to contact me, you can also find me on different social networks and also my works. And I'm very happy to answer some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ralph. Excuse me, that was a wonderful presentation. And we do have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to pose them. The first one's from Melissa Knavitz. I'm going to read it and then hopefully give a detailed response. Great presentation, Ralph. I was particularly interested in your discussion about books, as my field is children's literature. The picture book looked powerful. My question, Are you aware of books for young readers that have been challenged or banned, as so many books about identity in the United States have been recently?
No, fortunately, we're not in the era yet, or hopefully we will not be in the era that books are banned in libraries. So there are all books that I've just shown to you are here in Europe and possible to read.
Okay. Francis Matu, Mahtue. I hope I pronounced that properly. Congratulations, Ralph, on your presentation. Thank you for sharing. It is interesting for me to combat the invisibility of Filipinos there. As a Filipino artist living abroad, I am interested in connecting generations of Filipino migrants through theater. I'm interested to know how receptive are the second and third generations of Filipino Austrians in learning Filipino culture. So there are a few other questions. We'll start with that, and then I'll ask the subsequent
Yes.
questions.
As I think nowadays young Filipinos, Filipinos of the second and third generation, are actually particularly interested to learning their roots, to learning about the heritage of the parents. It has changed over the past years. I can recall conversations from several years ago where they actually are uh, more interested in learning their language because they are seeing the benefits of understanding their through their language, through their mother tongue, their identity. And in terms of artists, we have a lot of artists here, and they are incorporating Filipino elements in their artistry.
Okay, the next question from Francis is, what impact would culture provide Filipino migrants in Austria?
I would like to showcase again the one that I showed to you, this Kubo Festival. It has a very big impact on the young Filipinos actually, because every year new young Filipino artists are joining this festival to um, showcase their artistry basically through either to media or through paintings, through literature. It's all about showcasing what you can do and what we have, basically. And I think it has a very big impact.
And Francis' last question is, what are some of the challenges and obstacles of the forerunners of Filipino culture and history experience in trying to share what they have been with this second and third generation?
I think one of the challenges that the first generation or the first generation had showcasing what the importance of Filipino culture is for the young persons is is that the young people only recognize the importance now when they are older. So if you put them in classes during their childhood or during their youth, most of them are not very interested because they have other things that they are interested in meeting their friends or have other activities basically in their life. When they grow up, they learn the importance of cultural diversity. They learn the elements that you have in your identity, that it is incorporated in your identity already. You don't need to showcase or to show them, or you don't have to have it in your mind. It is already embodied in your, basically in your body and in your identity, what Filipino-ness means. So it's something maybe that it's not so visible, but yeah, can be visible.
So let me follow up with some other questions that I think emerge from your research. You mentioned the idea of multiple identities. How do you define that? For example, do you define it as, for example, people having a civic identity versus an ethnic identity, versus a gender identity? How did you define that in your vision of the
Yeah.
book?
So maybe I will answer your question with my own experience. Even though I was born in Austria, I wouldn't consider myself as Austrian, but as a Filipino born in Austria. I would always say it in that sense. This comes from because I have the knowledge about, or I talk my mother tongue, I would consider is Filipino. So it's Tagalog, not German. Even though I was born here. And this is because I grew up with very tight connections to the Filipino culture, not to the community itself, because I just started going to the community when I was an adult. So I don't think that identity is something fixed. I think identity is very flow, has different characteristics, and can be established and constructed through different things. As you mentioned, for example, citizenship. Maybe it's a citizenship that is something that you would consider as part of your identity. So having, for example, some of my colleagues at the Halo Halo network, they consider themselves now as Filipinos because they have the passport. So they have a dual citizenship now, German and Filipino. In my case, I cannot have the Filipino passport in Austria because the law forbids it. So that's not an option for me. Other, for example, would consider themselves uh, only as a German because they don't have any connections to the Philippines, but have Filipino elements in their livelihood. So I think it's an individual question to answer.
So the idea of a fluid identity seems to be something that's a useful concept. Would you say yes?
Yes, I would say yes. I think we should understand identity as something hybrid, as something fluid.
So, how do you connect the research you did and the experiences of the people you interviewed to the idea of universal human rights? For example, did any of the people you spoke to and interviewed raise concerns about their rights being denied, either through the European Charter or the Universal Declaration?
Not so much in that sense, but rather on the bureaucratic hurdles. Not in terms of their own experiences, but experiences of the others in their own communities, in their own environments. Like what I just mentioned before, uh, someone talked about the experience that her siblings couldn't work as in healthcare because it is just too bureaucratic. They would rather go and work as a salesman, sales lady in a shop than to work in a healthcare system here in Austria because you have to pass the German language exam, you have to pass other bureaucratics, and this has something to do with human rights in my opinion, because if the hurdles and obstacles are too high
Hmm,
to do the things, then it's not equal for everyone. But
right.
in
It's
this
a
sense, yeah, yeah.
frustration, yes. So, in the broader context of research, I wanted to ask this question. You mentioned earlier in your presentation about the numbers of the diaspora of Filipinos in the world today. When you think about your research, how do you feel it informs that broader study of diaspora communities, whether it's Filipino or others?
So I think opportunities like this one, like platforms like this one, is very important to communicate, to just disseminate what we have. We have researchers that are not seen because we don't know about them, basically. And it's important, I think, on a general matter, to have opportunities to get opportunities to just show also different communities um, that we are here and that we can show you what we can offer and that you can take it basically what we can offer. So And I think maybe I hope I answered your question correctly.
Let me pursue it a little further. We could take any number of diaspora communities, the Irish, for example, or people from the Philippines, China, people from the Southern Hemisphere, many different places that have ended up outside of their country of origin, right? If we looked at those diaspora communities, do you feel some of the things you brought out in your research would also be found in studies of those communities?
I think so, because it's not just so yes, the experiences are individual experiences. The experiences are maybe just of the Filipino communities, but in the end, the experiences are the same for all immigrants that move to Austria, that move to somewhere else. It's not just an experience that is within the community, but that deals or that the problems that you see and you find there that I just shown to you in this presentation, you find it elsewhere too, also in other communities.
I think that's an important dimension of going forward with your own research because um, we're facing, as you know, worldwide today, the largest migration shift in the last 70 years. But many people, I think, who don't examine the way you did the actual experience of people tend to view it as an aggregate issue. In other words, they don't look at the person, they look at the whole. But I think the very valuable thing you've done is you said, I'm going to look at 5 people and their individual lives, and then I can make some generalizations. And that's where I think if you looked at other communities, second generation youth, for example, who were migrants of diaspora, I think that would be very interesting because we might find not only universality, but some very interesting differences between how countries that are receiving diaspora communities deal with them. So it might be something for you to consider down the road.
Yes.
And my last question is this. You bring up the idea of looking at second generation through life histories. What are the limitations, though, of a life history approach?
I think that one of the limitation is, of course, that when you talk with these people, they are talking about their own life stories. They are talking about their own biographies. And people sometimes forget that you have to put these life stories into the historical context, into the local and historical context. So if you talk about the second and third generation of Filipinos, you always have to put them, in my case, in the Austrian or in the German-speaking country context. Because the context of the second, third generation Filipinos in America is different than in Europe. We might have the same experiences of, let's say, racism or discrimination, but of course, something might happen in Austria that don't happen in America. It's something with this. That's why it's difficult to talk about with a generational label without putting it into context.
Right. And because, for example, in the United States, there was a colonial relationship with the Philippines that was, significant, I think, in the relationship between the first generation coming to the US, the connections between settler and all that. I would be interesting, I think, too, in Spain because of its long colonial history with the Philippines. Did you have any, could you point us to any research or other work about that?
Yes, there are some scholars, but I would need to look to
Okay.
to the scholarly works. Yeah.
So we could contact you by email and pursue that.
Yes. If you are
Great.
interested, please just write me an email.
Okay, well, I want to open it up to anyone else who has questions who's on the Zoom right now, but we have about 5 minutes left with Ralph.
Yes, I think that you have such an interesting piece of work, and it's worldwide. you know, you focused on the experiences of Philippine students and young people, but it is the same dynamic that occurs in almost every uh, culture where you have a migration pattern, right? And looking for your identity. And so I think that the generalizations that you have are really important. As a sociologist, you know that this is what we do, is we like to generalize information. And so I think that you've got some brilliant pieces to go with. As a point for you and for others on, Audrey Ulster, who does a book, who does human rights education, has a new book out called Where Are You From? No, really, Where Are You From? And she is Indian. I think she is Southeast Asian, and she's also British. And people look at her and she's living in Norway. And so people say, where are you really from? It's like, well, no, I'm really from here. And like, as you point out, Ralph, you're really from two places, right? And so how do you answer the question? And as we go into being a more multicultural world, we need to open our heads to see that we are not just one thing. So I see Matthew has a question, so I will sign off.
I do. Thank you. Ralph, thank you so much for that presentation. Did you read all those books that you had there?
No, actually not. I just just the ones that I pointed out. That's why those were my recommendations.
Yeah, no, it looks really cool because in America, we do have book banning, and actually in my little corner of the globe, we're gearing up for another book banning. It just blows my mind. Anyway, you mentioned about passports. So do you have an Austrian passport? Or,
Yes.
okay, and you also are Filipino, yes? So
Not by passport.
not by passport,
Not by yes.
but how are you Filipino? Were you born there, or is it through just family?
Only through in my case, only through family. So
Okay,
that's maybe that's why I want to strengthen basically this hybrid identity concept.
yeah.
Because sometimes it's not just about citizenship. It's not just about these documents.
Yeah, because it's who you identify, what your cultural thing. So do you, because I have two passports. I have American and I have British. And, so I have that luxury because America or Britain allows dual nationality. Do you find that because you can't have that access to dual nationality as per documents and so forth, does that impact, how you identify or how you're vocal about your identification of nationality?
In my case, it wasn't a problem. I think it was a problem for the German colleagues that I have in my other network, this Halo Halo network, because they strive for to get this Filipino passport because they wanted, so they identified themselves as German Filipinos and wanted to have, it is easier for them to buy, for example, a house there in the Philippines. So it's always for them, it's more connected to this passport thing to have the Filipino passport. For me itself, since I knew it from the beginning that I don't have it,
Yep.
I never considered it basically as something important.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ralph. Well done.
Well, I would like to thank you both for a lovely presentation. It's very thought-provoking. And Bill, your comments, you're a wise professor and you had the scholarly eye on how to help Ralph move his work forward. And this is part of what we do as the Fellows Program, is to help each other have an opportunity to explore and to develop the work. And so your comments have been very helpful, I'm sure, for Ralph, who one day would like to graduate, I suspect. Right? So I really
Yvonne?
appreciate that.
And I just may add one thing. You had mentioned Audrey Osler's book. If people are interested, the episodes 25 and 26 of Human Rights Education Now are a conversation with Audrey Osler on the podcast, and she discusses her book. So it might be insightful for people.
And on that note, will you tell people about the podcast and about your new book?
Human Rights Education Now is a podcast run by Human Rights Educators USA. It's available on www.hreusa.org. And we have published 26 episodes, that's 2 each month, with people who are expert or have experienced in human rights education, including our host, Yvonne Bissing. And if you're interested, you can go there. Soon, I think we will be having transcripts available. In fact, Apple Podcasts has it on their list, and you can get a podcast transcript of the Osler interviews if you want. But the next 2 episodes will be posted as of Monday, and they'll feature Maria Hanzopoulos from Vassar College. So if you're interested, sign up, put it on your podcast list, and I think you'll enjoy it.
And your book?
Oh, well, the book that Gloria Alter and I did, Human Rights Education Dealing with Higher Ed. Yeah, that's been published about a year ago from Roman and Littlefield, and it deals with the relationship of human rights education with higher education, teacher training and other things. And we've got a pretty good reception from it.
It's wonderful. And the podcasts are so good. And Bill has a team that he works with, to be sure, because we can do nothing alone. We always need a team. However, he has been the inspiration. So when we go back to looking at the message earlier of the day from David Hogg on how can one person change the world? The answer is yes. Okay, well, that way. I was trying to point to you, right?